Welcome in, people. Welcome back. I am Jeremy Toms, host of the Big Law Capitalist podcast, and I can't tell you how excited I am to have you back, to have you on another episode. This is a dream come true for me, so I'm so glad to have you here. Today's episode, we have Rick Perez. Rick is a senior VP at loanDepot. He's doing major things, not only on his active income side, right, on the W-2 side, but also on the passive side. So he's doing both. And he's really kind of active on the investment side too. He's doing a lot of really cool stuff. He's really, really good at structuring creative deals, right? Like literally using his relationships to create these really high upside deals. And so I want you guys to join in. I want you to join me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll tell you, make sure you stick around for the last 15 minutes. Super important because the last 15 minutes, it's chock full of value, especially going into how you leverage your relationships. I can't stress enough how important it is for you to leverage your relationships when it comes to commercial real estate and just real estate in general. If you want to build passive income, it's all about who you know. So without further ado, I want to bring in Rick. All right, guys, welcome in. I'm pumped. I'm super excited. We have Rick Perez on. Rick, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks. I really appreciate you you inviting me onto your podcast.
Absolutely, man. I love having you. I think you have a ton of insight on stuff that people otherwise wouldn't even think is a necessarily a value add to their investment portfolio. But I think as we get into it, I think you'll have a lot of insights that people will walk away being like, oh wait, like my network does matter. Like that, it's a really, really big deal, right? I think attorneys in general know that like their connections are sort of that's going to be their step, to level up, their sort of attorney portfolio, if you will, like, as far as like, leveling up, getting to that partnership level. But in real estate, it's that important, if not more so, because I think the network is what then helps you sort of generate, that mega wealth, that next level wealth. So let's dive into it, man. First, before we get into anything, I actually want to throw it to you because I want you to intro yourself. I know people are going to love hearing from you, but they want to know who they're hearing from, right? So tell us a little about yourself, man. Where are you from?
So originally from San Francisco, grew in San
Fantastic
Francisco.
city.
Yeah, grew in San Francisco. Moved there in 1998, which was like still like maybe a couple high rises and still growing and bad neighborhoods everywhere, but definitely a beautiful city at the time. And it was just it's the place to be if you want to be with the who's and the who's nots, right? So
Right. And so you were in San Francisco, so you saw like, I mean, the boom firsthand. You were there through
Yeah,
all of it.
I grew with it. Yeah, I grew with the city. I financed a lot of the high rises, and I saw a lot of my very close friends were developers who basically were very in the mecca of all the growth. I mean, one of my very close friends was even involved in that Millennial Tower building, right?
Mm,
Which still like, they saying it's tilting the whole 9 yards, but at the end of the day, like that building was a hot building when it was first built, and it still is, but yeah, I grew up the city, and the city was, I mean, it was just so beautiful back then, and it's changed a lot today, and don't want to dive into that aspect of it, but for the most part, yeah, I was able to be there with the growth and watch a lot of areas really grow in the sense of like its beauty, right?
yeah.
And why everybody wanted to live there. It was a place to be at the time. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I think it up until I think recently, right? It was the place to still be, right? It's just like could you afford to be
yeah,
there was
yeah,
the sort of it became sort of the downside of it. But and so you moved to San Francisco back in 98.
yeah.
Did you start investing in San Francisco or was that investment sort of happening after the fact?
No. I started investing 2002. I bought a neighborhood called the Outer Richmond, which is the craziest thing because my friends would laugh at me. They'd be like, "Hey, man, so where did you buy your home at?" I'm like, "Oh, I bought it in the Outer Richmond," and they're like, "Oh, that's not even in San Francisco," even though it was. But it was so far from them, which in reality it was literally 4 miles. And to them, it was like, you're way out of the city. Well, back then there was no Uber and there was no Lyft.
Right.
And no cab would ever take you that far out. So you had to get like a town car, like a black town car. Like you had to like literally pay $100 to go like home like on the weekends if you wanted to go out in the financial district where I worked at. And so But when Uber and Lyft came about, that neighborhood exploded. Like it was like the place. So now it's the place to be today,
Right.
right? And then from there, I invested in an area called the Dog Patch, and that was in 2003 or four. And I bought a loft there, and my old business partner convinced me to get it. She said, "Oh, you got to get this place. You're going to look good in it." I'm like, "No, I love my home. I don't need another place." She goes, "No, no, you're going to buy it." So she actually made the offer for me, and then we got in a contract, and I ended up buying it. And it was an area that was a really tough neighborhood.
Mm.
Like my car got broken into like at least every other week, right? It was like crazy, and I wouldn't. It got to the point where I just left my windows open. I'm like, "Man, take whatever you want." You know? So at that time, but now today, uh, you have the Warrior Stadium,
Mm-hmm.
you've got UCSF Children's Hospital, you got the Giant Stadium, you got now, you got public transportation running through there, you got restaurants, I mean, everything's there. So now it's like the place to be. And it is one of the sunniest parts of San Francisco. So a lot of people love being out there. But at that time, there was just nothing out there. It was just this loft. And then there's an old company an old clothing store that still exists, I think, in other parts of the world except for the U.S., called the Esprit outlet, the Esprit clothing. So that their headquarters was right in my neighborhood, and actually those are lofts now. So,
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, and then I end up buying a property right across from Golden Gate Park called the Panhandle, which is right next to Haight-Ashbury, and remodeled that home. And so I was able to really locate areas in San Francisco that weren't very expensive
Right.
at the time, but there was growth potential, right? And so that's kind of what I've always learned by my mom and dad. And then I owned several properties in San Jose, California, that I was able to then leverage, in the last 6 years. And so
Fantastic.
it was. But I mean, where all this came from, it really started from my mom and dad. I was the only one that really dabbed into this market. Like my mom, who's a top real estate agent for many years, I kind of followed her steps, and that, risk and, and I followed her investment portfolios. And my dad, being a retired contractor, he then was able then to manage their properties. I think at one time they had like 30 in San Jose.
Wow.
And then they leveraged to get better ones. Right. And so, yeah, I think I just took that niche from them, and then I applied it to I call it a good feeling buy. So I'll go into a neighborhood and I'll be like, and in my heart, I'm like, this is the spot.
Yeah.
And everyone who I've referred people to in those areas that I know who are friends of mine who are like, no, I'm never living there. Today, their homes are worth like over $1.5 million. And so I just have that niche. And so coming to Pittsburgh, fast forward to Pittsburgh, I've done the exact same thing and it's worked out. Right. And so
that's a good segue, because I wanted to ask you. So, I mean, you're doing all of this, right? Even then, you're doing all of this while maintaining what I assume at that point was a W-2. Is that right?
Yeah, no. Well, during the time in San Francisco, I had my own business. And so me and a partner, we kind of struck gold during the .com era, which was 2000, right? Our company got sold, our stock split. And then what we did was we lend hard money out to contractors and investors.
Just for the sort of the listeners' edification, right? What is hard money?
Hard money is basically a type of financement that goes on that's leveraged out to a client that, has the capital to use, doesn't want to use all their money, wants to get a transaction done quickly. And basically you have these investors that say, hey, I believe in what you're doing. I'm going to look at the overall, steps of your purchase, or the steps of what you're buying. And I'm going to either agree or not agree whether I want to, lend you this so you can close quickly based upon the terms that I'm going to give to you. This is not, it's what we call non-traditional financing in my business. Right. So non-traditional,
like private debt, right?
Or private. Right. So, and I guess hard money would be kind of I don't know, I guess they call that, that'd be a street name for it, but so
Yeah, right. It's like it like covers like a massive swath of like of debt financing that's like, higher interest rate, little riskier deals, right? But like you use it, short term in order to, you can do a number of things with it, right? You
right,
can flip,
right.
you can do a number of things. But yeah, no, I wanted to toss out that definition. So I cut you off. So you were saying that at the time you were running a business.
So yeah, we had our own business, and basically what I did was, when we started lending this money out, we were approached by several correspondents to take on a line of credit, which we
Mm,
did, and then we started then working with brokers. And I didn't know anything about that industry. Right, this was
right.
probably roughly around 1999, 2000. I had no clue about that industry, so I'm like, okay, how do we do this? So what I did was I hired a UCLA economist who was who knew about mortgage-backed securities, who knew how to do mortgage-backed security trade-offs on Wall Street, and
Hmm.
he basically taught us, like, this is how you do it, this is how you make your margins, this is how you make your profits. Before you know, a line of credit started at 1 million, and then it started at 2 million, then at 10 million, and then I had to hire more people. So now I have an office of like 3,300 square feet. We have 100 employees, and now I'm selling mortgage-backed securities to Wall Street.
And this is early 2000s.
Yeah, all the way till 2000, probably 10.
Gotcha.
I was a Spanish major, so my friends today, they like, man, like, how'd you even get into math? Like, dude, we knew you as the worst mathematician in the world. I'm like, well, it becomes repetitive after a while, so it's like anything. So we did that,
Right.
and so I was running that business and also the investments at the same time.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, right. So
yeah,
you're
so yeah, so
pulling
we
sort
were,
of
yeah,
double duty, right?
right, right.
And so and sort of segued to now, right? So what's your say? Let's I guess focus on for a second your W-2. What's your W-2 title, right? Like what do you do now?
Oh yeah. So today today I work for loanDepot, and I work on their mortgage advancement side. So basically, a team of us decided to work together to start building out areas, for kind of a small business within a business, right? And so what we've done is we've taken our our connections, our those who we've been working with, which are a lot of investors, real estate agents, wealth management, CPAs, on and on and on, attorneys. And basically, what we did was we took our clientele base from San Jose and San Francisco. We moved it to a builder division in Boise, Idaho, and then I started building my business here in the Northeast, which was New York, and Pittsburgh. And so we've all been working together as a team to create this atmosphere for loanDepot in our business sector. So that's basically what I do is I work in mortgage finances, but we work as a team developing new development. And one of my specialties is condos
Mm,
because of my experience in San Francisco. I helped finance a lot of condos in San Francisco, and a lot of high rises, which then kind of taught me. Well, I learned a $75,000 loss on the loft that I bought in San Francisco for that to really educate me on how an HOA really
right.
works. And so that was what I brought not only to when I went to New York, but also to Pittsburgh, and so that's been kind of my niche, right? So everyone's got a niche.
Yeah.
Some people work with just doctors. Some people just work with investors. I work with condos, like and that's kind of what I've always been known as, especially when I was in San Francisco. Everyone knew, like, hey, if you're gonna get finance, like, go through Rick. Like, he knows everything about that place. Like, he knows everything about what's going on with the HOA. He's involved with the HOA presidency. He's involved with the HOA reserves. He knows, any litigations, how to go around the litigations. And so that's kind of what I niche myself to be, because not a lot of people want to take the time to read HOA
Oh yeah.
documents, right? Yeah, articles of incorporations, CCNRs, and all
Yeah,
the whole
bylaws,
nine
all that
yards.
stuff.
I mean,
Well, uh,
right, right.
one of the
So
things I love about you is that you sort of you take your talents, right, and you apply it in multiple areas. And what I call that is sort of like leveraging your time, right? Like you leverage your time on high growth activities, right? So you leverage your time in your business, which is why you're so good at your your W-2 job, right? Like 'cause you took so many years to
Right.
figure out how to do it well, and so you leverage your time in that, and then you also leverage your time on the investment side, which is how we actually got introduced. And so
Right.
one other part of leverage, because leverage is funny, right? Leverage people think is just about loans and about, having an asset and putting a loan on it. And thus I'm leveraging it. And I tell people all the time, like leverage can apply to a lot of things. Leverage is just about using something to, sort of scale your abilities in a certain area, right? Like being able to lift more than you otherwise would be able to. And you've done a great job at that. And you know, I won't copyright it, right? But like essentially, what I'm saying is you've done
Yeah.
a good job of leveraging your relationships. Like leveraging relationships
Yeah.
is vital, I think, to anybody's ability to scale their wealth, and I think you've done a phenomenal job at it.
Yes.
And so I wanted to chat
Yeah.
with you about what you think are important, qualities when it comes to leveraging relationships, right? Like not only just the ability to do it, so like your abilities, but also sort of looking at the people you have relationships with, who you enter into partnerships with, who you connect with in order to sort of, um, I guess, bring up the both of you, right? Like as
Yeah.
far as like getting into opportunities, right? Like there's a few here in Pittsburgh I know
Right.
you've done where you sort of leverage
Yeah.
relationships out in San Francisco and you bring them back this way, and allow them to sort of invest with you, on different
Yeah. Absolutely.
initiatives. So like I wanted to go a little bit into that. So as far as leveraging
Yeah.
relationships, how did that start for you, right? Like early in your investing career, when
Yeah.
did you start sort of leveraging your relationships to, access properties? I know you mentioned your business partner, got,
Yeah.
essentially put an offer in for you on that condo, but when did you really sort of see the benefit of like involving your closer relationships, people you trusted?
It's interesting you asked that because I'm like this social like butterfly that just loves being around people, right? And I think the more hands you touch, um, the more ability you get to understand what they do,
Mm,
right? And sometimes it's like a relationship. You realize like, hey, you and I like the same thing. You and I like doing the same thing. And then when you collaborate those people together, like it really makes it more
mhm,
powerful. And so in San Francisco, like I was saying earlier, my really good friends were like involved in these high rises, right? They were the head, um, you know, um, PMs, project managers of what was going on, and so they would be like, "Hey, Rick, we want to introduce you to people." For me, it was like I'm there, and once they introduced me to those who were involved in these projects, then I was able to leverage those relationships in the sense of, okay, I know now what you like. I know now what you're looking for. I may know something that's going on, on this side of town or on that side of town that you may have an interest in. I'll let you know once. And so for me, that's always been um, my way of conducting not only relations, but business. When you're in San Francisco, that's a high scale, right? You're,
right.
you're like, when you're working with those who are in those capacities, like you now know how to take that architectural plan and bring it now to a different city,
Hmm.
right? Now it may not be the same layout, but you can tweak that plan that you've already done and bring that to a city that's trying to grow. And actually you can teach people like, hey, these are the mistakes that people did at this high level. Like these are the things that they did very well at a high level. So let me tell you, what I think or my opinion. Whether you want to take that into consideration, great. Um, if you do or you don't, I'm just here to kind of give you my an experience of what I went through, leveraging those relationships. A lot of my good friends who have capital did not want to invest in Pittsburgh until I got
Right.
here. They wanted me to invest all of my money in Pittsburgh first to see if it was going to like be good. Like they're like, Rick, we love you, but we don't love you that
They're
much,
like, yeah,
And so
you go first. We'll meet you there.
yeah, so I did, and it's been very. So now they're on the train,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're like, all right, like, and it's funny that train for me was in 2015, and I didn't pull the trigger back then. And it's funny that we were all here at one time because of my job. That if we had done that, we would have been at a higher, return, right? But now that I'm still here, there's still opportunity, and so now those relationships that I've leveraged, they're now we're in that trust mode of like, hey, we believe in what we saw what you did in San Francisco. We believe now what you're doing in Pittsburgh is because I'm a person who what I would call a student of the area, right? So I love educating myself about what goes on in the city I live in,
Mm-hmm.
from the political aspect of it to the GDP aspect of it to the neighborhood aspect of it to everything. Like I want to know what neighborhoods are failing. I want to know what neighborhoods are doing well. I want to know everything. And so when I first got here, like my job, just like I did when I got to San Francisco, I drove around every neighborhood around Pittsburgh. I mean, every neighborhood. I would stop in the local restaurant in that neighborhood,
Right.
and I just ask questions because I really want to know, like, at one time what occurred here,
Right.
and at one time what's the prosperity of what can occur here. So
What's funny? Not to cut you off. What's really funny about the relationship piece is you never really know who when you meet somebody how much value they're going to add to
right,
sort of your ascent, if you will. So I've met people who I thought just happenstance, right? Just random meetings that end up turning out to be you know majorly beneficial for the growth of my wealth and also just my connections, right? Like people who,
right,
one of my good friends I met here actually where we live now in Pittsburgh, at a random, commercial real estate meetup and turned out to be one of the most well connected people I've ever met. And that's turned into, sort of a spider web of connections and sort of fellowship and
right,
relationships that have turned into deals, right? Which have turned into
right,
added wealth. And so I think a lot of times people look at real estate and they think, oh, it's a purely numbers game. That's not necessarily true. Like, I mean, there's a lot of deals that I've been
yeah,
involved in that I've sort of stumbled into just based on, hey, somebody thought of me when they met me one time, right? Like they knew me, they knew my reputation, which is an important part of all of this is reputation, and thought to include me because of it, right? But it's simply based
right,
on relationships and their sort of leveraging of our relationship, right? Like, them knowing me or people with you, right? Like people are getting
right,
involved in Pittsburgh because of you, right? Not because of necessarily
yeah,
Pittsburgh. So it all starts with
right,
that leveraging that relationship. Um, and on
absolutely,
that note, I wanted to touch on just quickly uh, one particular property you did recently that I think is just it's mind-boggling how you pulled it off in a number of ways. But like I think at the core of it, honestly, was the relationships piece. So we'll quickly touch on the deal, but I think then I want to kind of chat about like why this is so important, why people really need to think about this. So you bought a deal here in Pittsburgh, down in the Lawrenceville neighborhood. It was a multi-unit, right?
right. Lease space with a residential on top. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So you
Mixed.
had a
I
third
guess
floor bottom.
the word would be mixed use, right?
There you go. There you go. So mixed use. And what'd you buy it for?
Purchase price was $590. Yeah, it was
Okay.
for $509,000. And then there were some credits that were involved towards the end of the transaction that really were in the favor of our purchase, which granted was a true blessing, right? So the way it went down
Yeah.
was like it was crazy, but I mean it worked out in our favor, and we were very very happy um, with how we're very happy what we bought because my partners and we know the value of what it's going to be in the future, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
I ran by it. As crazy as could be, I prayed about it. Like and in my heart, it was like, you got to get that property, right? Like
Right.
you got to do whatever it takes to get that property. And we did.
Like literally, yeah. Like
Yeah. And
whatever it took.
it was like we've been talking about, it was through relationships, right? And so a common relationship that you and I have then veered it towards another relationship that I just built. And, the person saw value. He saw where we were coming from. He saw, that we were pretty responsible in our other businesses. So he felt like, hey, I want to help these guys out, right? I've never met this person, but because of my relationships and the ones that I've created, it really valued and it gave credibility to this person. Say like, hey, like I want to work, I want to help these guys out, and we did, and I think to be honest, it's going to be a very, very profitable investment. But how it went down was like we've been talking about. It was purely relationships that occurred here in Pittsburgh. That
Because it almost fell through, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, at the very
close
last
to
minute, yeah.
close to the closing date, it was like
Yeah,
it was starting to fall apart a
3
little bit,
days,
and
yeah,
that's
3 days right
yeah,
before it was like, man,
wild,
yeah,
just
but it went,
wild.
yeah, and so now my partners and I, we set goals for what we're going to do with the property when we want to have it completed, the things that we want to improve on. And so at the end of the day, like those things do occur sometimes, and it's, but when you want something, man, you got to, man, you got to fight, and so, we did, and it worked out. It really did work out for us, and our agent did a really good job, and everyone who was involved in the transaction really worked hard to see it go through. So, but like you were saying earlier, it was tough. Yeah, but it was a great purchase.
And I was pumped for you because I mean I was happy to be able to even point you in any direction, but let alone be the right direction, right? To get it figured out. But I brought that up because I think it's critical to point out how important relationships are in this business,
Yeah,
even if you're not an active investor, right?
right.
Like Rick, you're an active investor, you've done very well at it. I'm an active investor, I've done really well at it. But even if you're just somebody who's investing passively, it's still so critical to have those sort of built-in relationships that will allow you to meet the right people and
Right,
have the right people point you in the right direction, right?
right.
To the right operator, to the right sponsor who's going to be able to sort of get you involved in the deals that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get involved in. So
Yeah,
um we're running up against our clock, man. And I
yeah.
just want to at first I want to say thank you so much.
Of course.
Like I say to all my guests, thank you so much, man. I know you're busy. I know how busy you are, especially with all you have going on. So I really do appreciate it, man.
No.
Um, oh, real quick before we go, I want to make sure you can plug your socials, man. So is there anywhere that people should look for you?
It's interesting. And everyone gets mad at me because I'm not a social media guy. Man. Everyone's like, man, Rick, you're not on Facebook, you're not on Instagram, you're not on, I'm like, I think I'm on LinkedIn. And every once in a while, like, I don't even realize I have the account. I'm an old school, listen, I'm old school in the sense of like, I go into battle, right? And what I mean by battle is uh, I go to events and I'm
Yeah.
like a hand grenade. Like someone released a pin and I'm ready to go, like, just like go meet everybody. Right. So, and then from there, I build a relationship, really face to face. And then you really get to know somebody, like, when you sit down with them, right? You're there for an hour and you're sponging everything they're telling you. They're sponging everything you're telling them. And I just feel like I've never gotten away from that. So when COVID hit, like, oh man, like I went crazy. I was like,
Tough.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, because I don't
Yeah.
know any social media, right? So I'm like, okay, now I'm stuck in the house. So I started just traveling all over the country, going to areas that were open so I could still go to events, right? People are like, dude, you're nuts. I'm like, no, I'm not nuts. I'm like, I need to get to these events. So somewhere in Texas, somewhere in Pittsburgh, somewhere in Florida. And so I just never lost a beat.
Yeah.
But when it comes to social media, my sister, who's a big social media queen, she's just like, I gotta get you plugged in because everything you do, everyone needs to know about, and no one even people know you everywhere, but you know how many more people could know you? And I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm like, but I'm like, let me think about it, right? So for right
Well,
now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, no. Well, fair enough. Then I totally get it, man. I'm right there with the same boat. Luckily I have a good team behind me who can help me right get the message out.
Yeah,
But I'm right there with you. But
full time
well,
job.
so
Yeah,
Well, so I'll make sure that the social media you do have, right, LinkedIn, I'll make sure we plug that into the show notes.
Yeah.
But Rick, man, thank you so much. I can't
You're
thank
welcome,
you
bro.
enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
To the audience, to the listeners, thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate you guys jumping on with us. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is to have the right relationships in this game, right? In the investing game in real estate. If you want to scale your wealth, if you want to get involved, it's about knowing people. And so part of that's just, reaching out to people, asking the questions. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram or my LinkedIn. Instagram, it's at the Big Law Capitalist. LinkedIn at Jeremy Toms. Thank you all so much. I'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.
All right, we did it. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. I really, really do appreciate it. Do me a big favor. If you want to be a part of the Big Law Capitalist community to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes, you gotta hit that subscribe button. Super important. But I can't thank you enough for joining me this week. I'll see you next time. Peace.